to this very early ad hoc committee meeting. I'll start just with doing the roll. So Michelle Weber.
Here.
Emily Secord is hopefully joining us soon. Susan Cox, and we also have Mark Johnson with us today. So good morning, everybody. Camille, thank you for all the, as you said, out of an abundance of information. Thank you for sending all the stuff that you sent along, but it really was helpful. And in particular, the comparative information from some of the other transit districts as well. So I think for us to just start moving right into the agenda, and my hope is that at the end of today, we'll be close to ready. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think
ready for what? I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, I think I mean, my opinion is that the bylaws are looking pretty solid, and we can send those out to the attorney to take a final look at.
Right.
Then it's just whatever policies you want to review.
Right. Agreed. Michelle, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I feel like we're getting really close to completion.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think we do want to at least take a look at the harassment policy and maybe,
right.
Fine tune that a little bit.
I think that's what we settled on last week.
Yeah.
Last meeting.
Yeah, but I think we're getting there.
Okay. Mark, do you have any other comments you want to make? Are we ready to go right in? And I see that Emily Secord is joining. So thanks for being here, Emily.
Nope, I think you can jump right in and
okay.
We're good.
Okay, great. Emily, you're there and kind of can see you. Okay, great. Okay, so at today's meeting, we're going to go over the stuff that we've already had before. One of the things we talked about was the role of the board, the role of the president, the board staff, all the different attachments that we had. And we were going to look at the updated, amended bylaws that have been redlined. And I think we've pretty much gone through all of those at this point. And that we're ready to just look at, excuse me, I'm looking at sorry, I have a migraine. I'm having a hard time being able to go from one piece of paper to the other. Okay. Excuse me, I'm gonna turn my light off just a second. Michelle, can you do this? I'm sorry, I need to go take a break.
Okay, sure. Okay, so I think first, Emily, did you have a chance to kind of read through the latest revisions on the bylaws? And do you have any other comments or thoughts on anything that we might need to adjust?
No, I think it looks pretty good. I think we've got a really close to a final version. I think it's a great opportunity for everybody else to weigh in now. There wasn't anything that I felt like we left out or missed, so I'm feeling pretty comfortable with the document.
Okay, good. I am too, and it sounds like Susan is as well. So, and Mark's feeling pretty good about it too. So I think we're in good shape. Let's see. So then we were working on the board working agreement and that policy. We've received some revised wording in that document. What are our thoughts, comments, any additional things we need to make sure we get in there? Change.
I was just going to say, I like some of the additions that are in there that feel like they're getting us closer to the strategic plan and kind of keeping in mind the roles a little bit differently and better. I still think it's a little bit of either overlap or maybe disconnect between the bylaws and the working agreement. So I think we're close, but I still think there's a few little details that kind of make it confusing. Like, should I be looking at the bylaws for this or looking at the working agreement? But that's maybe just my personal opinion. I don't know if it.
Do you have an example, Emily, of something that we would want to kind of talk about that around?
I think it's pretty much what we had talked about last time, is just trying to figure out, like, I guess the section that we made a lot of edits on was like the role of board leadership, like the role of the president. And so just having read some of that from the other organizations made me wonder if we should be making other edits to that. Sorry. 1 second.
Okay, so like, I guess we need to kind of talk through what types of edits and where those, you know, kind of what that theme is and where we want those edits.
Yeah. I felt like we tightened them up quite a bit. Emily, do you have a specific suggestion on language that you would change or adopt?
Well, I guess maybe if we look at some of the, like the ABCD attachments, just kind of wondering how those should be meshed together or if they should be separate. I feel like we've got a lot of documents to go through and I'm just trying to figure out how to marry them all together. So nothing specific, just trying to create as much clarity as possible. Or if we want to incorporate some of those documents together. I don't know. I guess that was my question.
Okay, so I'm trying to kind of reflect back a little bit to our last conversation. And Camille provided all of these different documents to us based on kind of the things that we were trying to tighten up a little bit. And I think, if I remember correctly, we wanted to kind of put those roles of the different officers as they relate to LTD and how we expect or want our board to function. So maybe that's where we need to kind of start the conversation as far as the president, the vice president. What do those roles look like, right? What are the expectations on those two positions, and how they work together with the rest of the board and the general manager? Is that kind of where your thought process is going?
Yes, thank you. That was a good description. I guess I was thinking mostly of the, I think it's C maybe, sorry, let me, like attachment B, the role of the chair, and whether or not we want to adopt any of that more specifically into bylaws or working agenda, board working agreement.
Okay, so I think I still am kind of thinking that it's good to have this be part of our working agreement and referenced in the bylaws, because it gives us flexibility if something's needing to be adjusted. You know, I mean, I think kind of what we've learned in the course of the last few months is that you don't know what you don't know until you're in a situation. And so, so I think it'll be good to have some flexibility in making those adjustments more quickly and, you know, just not being tied to a big bylaws conversation.
I think I'm comfortable with that. I think there should be a minimal amount of description in the bylaws, because I think that really is the governing document. So I think if there's a compromise to be had between the two of them, I would be comfortable with that.
Okay, so Susan, do you have kind of some thoughts on that? On
I
how we would go there?
I agree. One of the things that having all these documents is done, it sort of is sometimes I find a bit difficult going from back and forth, and it makes it a bit more complicated. So I think making it as simple as we can in the bylaws and having the working documents reflect how it's actually going to be in practice.
Okay, so
Is there I guess my question maybe would be, was there anything in attachment B for the role of the chair that we'd want reflected, anything that we want to keep, or can we make that, really an efficient descriptor partially in the bylaws and maybe more further described in the working agreement? Would that be a way to dive into it without feeling overwhelmed?
Maybe. I'm just kind of trying to get the bylaws, that section, and then this document with all of the other pieces kind of put in this, in my view here. So we do have in the bylaws in 3.3.1, we do have some duties of the president lined out in there. And then the vice president basically just kind of fills that in if the president's not available. So did you have anything specifically reading this job of the chair exhibit, Emily, that you would add in there to the bylaws? The bylaws speak to running meetings, being the board liaison between the board and the executive management team and council, appointing members of committees.
No, I actually thought I thought we were pretty close to this. There was a section.
Do you think, could Camille maybe put that up on the screen share so other people can see it? Would that be helpful?
Yes, is it attachment B that you would like me to share? Okay.
Yes, the job of the chair.
Okay.
The yeah. I guess one of the things that I felt about the new revision was it's twice as long as what it was before. And I'm frankly more comfortable with the more precise, or the shorter definition, which actually does reflect what some of the other agencies had as well.
So just as a reminder, what we had done was taken the, let me share that really quickly. The role of board leadership, we took all of those items out of the working agreement and moved them into the bylaws. So that's why it's more expanded now in the bylaws. And I just wanted to make sure that you all did see that on all of the attachments, A through D, I bookmarked each organization. So if you do open your bookmarks, you can, I was trying to condense how many documents I was providing into as few as possible because it is a lot. So we have APTA, CTRAN, and Spokane where I provided best practices.
Thank you, Camille. So there's a lot to try to gather up, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, I kind of think, Susan, I think I'm with you a little bit as to now that we've moved all of these into the bylaws, right? There's this concept that we were talking about, but now it looks like we tried to simplify the bylaws and kind of condense the wording, and we've really added a bunch into here. So when you actually see it, it looks a little bit out of sync.
Yeah.
So do we want to make the bylaws more succinct, or do we want to add to the working agenda? I guess where are we landing? Because you guys are kind of, that's sort of what I was getting at, was we're kind of expanding and contracting different things, and I'm not sure if we've got the clarity that we need in either of them just yet.
Mm-hmm.
Although the content is good, I'm not sure if we've got it dialed in.
Yeah, I mean, I prefer the shorter.
shorter bylaws.
Yes. Well, no, I mean, I'm looking at the red line in here and one of the things that I think we talked about last time, depending on the personality or the wishes of who is the board president, are they interested in being the spokesperson that and having some latitude, or did we determine that in the delegating portion of that was going to be covered?
I think we had talked about saying or delegated because there was a lot of duties that could be delegated, let's say to Camille as the clerk of the board or vice president, et cetera.
Excuse me.
I mean, another option, and this is just something that, you know, maybe, I don't know, I'm reluctant to say this, but maybe we provide all of this to the rest of the board and say, you know, we're kind of at a sticking point of where we want to go from here. I don't want to like kind of kick the can down the road, but maybe we're struggling because we've looked at this too much.
Did anybody send any remarks or anything in, the rest of the board members?
No.
So it sounds like you're in agreement on the content. It's
Right.
just a matter of where it's housed. And I mean, we've been looking at this and going, you know, we really want the bylaws to be kind of more short and direct, and move things in either to policy or, you know, the agreements that, you know, drive the bylaws. So, I mean, if that's kind of, well, I mean, that is kind of where we've headed. So it makes sense that actually this is in the board working agreement rather than the bylaws. I mean, we kind of went the other way because there was issues on we wanted to clarify the roles. And so it's like, well, you know, in bylaws are a good place to do that. But we could certainly summarize this and move it back to the working agreement. So.
Camille, do you have readily available the wording that was in here for the role of the president in the bylaws before we made this shift?
Yes, give me just one moment and I can pull that up.
Because maybe we just need to massage that a little bit and then refer to the working agreement. Maybe that'll solve.
Okay, so this was the previous language. And I can make that larger if you need me to.
I can see it. I don't. Susan, Emily, are you okay with what? Okay.
And Michelle, what are you thinking you want to do with this?
Well, I'm just thinking, so what Camille has up here now for us is the wording that was in our bylaws prior to the last adjustment. And I think maybe we just need to look at this wording and see if that's where we need to make adjustments and then reference the board working agreement for more detail.
And that's as opposed to what's in the redlined version, because I think the redline version is pretty good.
Well, the red line version, I think what Susan and I are saying is that we added a lot of content to the bylaws when we were trying to condense it.
So anything that's not governing maybe moves to working agreement instead of bylaws. Okay.
Right, because this is, so all of this red line stuff that we've added now into the bylaws is very specific to the role of the president. And I think that I feel like the wording in the bylaws should be a little bit more generic's not really the word I want to use, but
More permanent.
More permanent. Yeah. And this is, these are things that could be changed as each board comes in. They might have a different kind of view as how they want to operate. It can be done so many different ways. It's just, I think that gives the board at that time some flexibility in how they govern themselves without being, strictly tied to something because the bylaws say that's the way it works.
I feel like bylaws should be permanent and they don't necessarily change from one board of directors to another. Whereas some of the specific action that does take on, that can change, which makes it more appropriate to be in the working document.
Right. So I would, as opposed to all of these bullet points in the bylaws, I would rather see something just more descriptive of the role of the president, but without all of the detail behind it. Like, what is the president's job, right? They do have in every board, there's a specific role that the president has. And that's basically to lead the board in meetings, and to be the contact between the general counsel and the manager. But I think that's kind of where our heartburn started coming in is, and I still think it all kind of just starts to revolve around communication. And I think that's where, for me, I feel like if we just had a more open communication channel, maybe that would solve some of the other frustrations or feelings of disconnect or whatever those things are that we're experiencing.
I mean, even the original unchanged, which is very short, to me that seems very permanent. The president, and in the president's absence, the vice president. I think wanting to add a bit more about the fact that they select or appoint the committees. I think, yeah. Emily, what do you think?
I just shut my tab that has the working agreement, but I feel like we definitely were on this track last time because I remember we expanded the role of the board, but didn't necessarily specify who was the sort of governing person for that rather than just the role of the board itself. So I think this is kind of where we were left off last time. So I'm glad we're still in agreement. And I'm fine with this. I agree. The governing document bylaws should be permanent and pretty succinct, but then the working agreement can be a little more flexible. I still think it's a lot of just sort of moving back and forth. I don't know that it's a lot of content issues. So maybe we just have to start moving things and then saying, this is the recommendation for the rest of the board to maybe get a little bit more perspective on. I just feel like we're kind of circling around the same topics, which I think is good. I think it means we're getting closer.
Okay, so are we in agreement then that we want to go back to what we had previously as far as the role of the president and then maybe focus more in the operating agreement on these other more detailed pieces?
I don't like all of the wording in that original one, but I think what I kind of want to do is look at the red line version of the bylaws in that first paragraph before the bullet points. And I think that would be my preference. Sorry, and I'm sort of toggling between the two right now. So I think some of the reason this looks longer is just simply because it is bullet points, but I think like those first 3 or 4 are probably pretty darn close. And then maybe, anything that's not really necessary to be the chair, the president's role could be moved to working agreement. What do you guys think? Or even that first bullet point could be what sticks in the bylaws and the rest gets to working agreement. I don't know. That's what I'm trying to figure out where the line is on that.
I mean, the first 3 or 4 definitely are the roles, those are definitely functions of the president.
Which is really close to that first original version that Camille just was showing us.
Mhm. I'm in agreement with that.
I think we can try that, and then, I'm kind of visual, so I kind of need to see it in its final
Me too.
final form before I can fully say I'm, but to give Camille one more red line to do, I think we could just, see what that looks like.
And I guess the only other question I had was there was a few items in there in the red font that I just wanted to understand if that has to be bylaws, because that is, if we have to do it that way, or if it is something that's flexible. So that was my only other kind of concern on this, is if we start moving things out of the bylaws, are there things that are in fact that, just by nature of the role need to be in the bylaws that I wouldn't know.
Right, and I think that's where we would need to have our attorney review this, just to make sure we're not missing something really significant. And that we haven't added something that, we shouldn't. I think that's, kind of has to be one of the final stages for this.
And I was going to ask, do we want that to happen before it goes to the rest of the board? Just so that we know this is, if they said, looks good, we're not going to change anything, and then it gets reviewed by council. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out what we think is the better pathway.
If we're trying to move this forward, I think letting the full board see everything, and then having legal review it.
I think it would be helpful to have the full board read the final versions, and just, if there's anything they feel is missing or anything that we need to maybe adjust the wording on, that would be good to have.
Yeah, that sounds
But
good.
we've asked a few times for feedback, and it's kind of, for me, lack of feedback means that there's probably comfort, and I'm just making an assumption. But I would think if there were concerns at this point, that hopefully we would have heard from our fellow board members on the topics by now.
Mark, how long would it take, do you think, to have the legal review?
Probably not too long. I mean,
Okay.
it's a fairly straightforward document.
Sure.
She's familiar with it. I mean, I could ask for a week turnaround. And
Oh,
she
wow.
could
Well,
probably
then,
get that to us.
yeah. Then I think that makes sense. I was thinking it would take longer, since we've taken longer.
And I just had a small edit, just because Camille, you've got this page up as the shared view. It looks like the board president will participate in the orientation of new board members, and the one right after that is very repetitive. So maybe we can save a couple line items there just to clean up.
Yeah, thank you for that. And so just to clarify, what you're wanting done is all of these items that we took from the working agreement and put into the bylaws, I'm now moving back to the working agreement. Okay, and we do have the next meeting scheduled on March 21st, so we could send the draft bylaws to council for review, and then you guys can look at it one more time on the 21st, and then it can go potentially to the April board meeting for discussion?
I think that was all accurate except for the very last sentence. I think they said they want it to go to the whole board to review and then to council. Was that what you wanted?
I guess when Mark said that it was only going to be a week, it makes sense to me to go ahead. I was thinking it would delay.
Yeah, I kind of feel like we're at a point where we probably should have council look at it and just make sure we're not really, missing a key component, or I would think the board would want to review the final wording and not, you know what I mean, the attorney reviewed wording.
I think that sounds good. That way we're looking at a real document and saying, okay, this has been reviewed by council. There's no concerns. If the rest of the board's on, okay with this, then we've got a good document.
I also think, at least from my perspective, it'll be helpful to see it in correction rather than the going back and forth. And at least from my perspective, I keep getting confused about it.
And then I just have other, just really, I don't know if it's helpful comments even. So I'm trying to debate how much to weigh in here, but some of the stuff under the president's role, like the orientation of the new board members, I thought, well, that could really be, the secretary, it could be the vice president. Like how much do we want to load onto this person's plate? Or is there a way that we say, the board president delegates orientation, to the vice president? And if that's working agreement information.
The bylaws say that the president can delegate any of its duties. They can delegate any duties to another officer or another board member.
But it also says participate. That could be an introduction. It doesn't necessarily mean attending everything. So, and again,
Right.
Having it in the working document gives latitude to changing rather than the policy.
Right. I think we want our working document to be flexible, but set the tone.
Correct.
Yeah, and I mean, the orientation piece, I mean, usually I handle most of that. Their general manager handles most of the orientation. There's usually just a brief maybe introduction by the board president, but other than that, it's not a huge lift for the board.
And then just to save on time, are we going to ask Camille to do the same thing for any of the other roles? Or do you feel like we did not add so much to the vice president, secretary, treasurer?
I don't think we really made a whole, we just added the piece that if for some reason the president is unable to permanently fill that role, the vice president would not just assume it, but we would elect that position. And I think I would like to see that stay there. And then the treasurer and secretary, we didn't really make any major adjustments there. So I think it's really the role of the president that we kind of were more focused on really clarifying that role. So Camille, have we totally messed with you now, or?
Not at all.
Okay.
Not at all.
Okay, so then do we want to go ahead and with the adjustments that we've talked about in here, we want to get it then reviewed by council and then come back at it one last time to see how it looks to all of us and the full board. And then so that, does that mean we're ready to kind of move back into the working agreement and maybe getting into the harassment policy?
So
Sure. I think that sounds good. I'm having a hard time switching back and forth. And so I think if we say we're 90% of the way there on the bylaws, look at it one last time and then have council review it and then have the board review it. I think that's a good pathway.
Okay. All right. Susan, you want me to just carry forward or do you want
Could you
to?
please, I'm
Okay.
really struggling here.
That's okay, just making sure. Okay, so then the next document, I had just expressed kind of some not concern, but just made a request that we kind of soften the wording in the introduction piece of the handbook, and I like what it says now. I think it's just, you know, this document, this is kind of what it does for you, and please read it. So I'm good with what we have in there. Is there any additional thought on that?
I concur. Yeah.
Emily, are you okay with the introduction piece now on the Board of Directors manual, where it talks about the manual itself and
Yes,
its
and
purpose?
I like how the strategic, you know, some of the stuff we've talked about through the strategic planning process got incorporated. I think it's, I think you said just the tone of that is a lot different. So.
Okay, great. We can put that one aside and move on. Look at us go. Okay, so the board working agreement, then we're going to move some of those pieces back into this document as far as the role of the president. Is that what we're in agreement on that? Okay.
Yes.
And I kind of think at this point with this document too, I'd like to just see it in its more final state. Because the going back and forth, my brain's starting to see red lines where red lines aren't, and you know, getting a little fuzzy. So unless we have some really major content changes here, are we ready to kind of put this one to the side too for now?
Sorry, on page 3 of the working agreement, the red line, number 13, I still have a little bit of pushback preferred on how we're getting stuff onto the agenda, because if there isn't a work session, or I don't know, maybe something comes up at the last minute, I just would like that to be a little bit more flexible. I don't know. I just feel like that one's like a little bit, I don't know. I just have some concerns about if there was something that needed to happen a little bit more urgently, or without a work session maybe scheduled, that could become a little bit messy. And I think for me, that's been an area that's been a little bit frustrating. So I don't know how we can improve it, but I just wanted to point that out. It's a little bit more strict, I think, than what we're asking for in a lenient document.
I guess the other option for getting things on the agenda is working directly with the president. So, you know, there's, you know, and general manager for that matter. You know, if something comes up and a board member says, well, wait a minute, you know, that, you know, this needs to be, you know, on agenda. I mean, you can always work with the president as an option, because the president can put things on the agenda.
Yeah, and I think that's what I'm trying to say very politely here, is that I absolutely disagree that that should be our process, because it has been problematic more than just 1 year. And so I think that even though this adding in the work session is definitely a helpful option to at least start a conversation, there are things that I think the board itself needs to have some opportunity to govern its own agenda. Obviously, we want to keep that within reason because we want to stay on task and stay with our mission, but occasionally I think this has been an issue, and I just don't think that this resolves the issue.
So, and your concern is that we may not have a work session every month, that things may, okay. Well, I mean, we could move that option to the board meeting and have that discussion at the board meeting for future agendas, because rarely do we miss board meetings. So rather than, but, you know, I mean, I think there's got to be general agreement on the board to put things on the agenda.
I agree. Yes. Yeah. So maybe that's the solution, is that this is the board work session, or there's a, 1, 2-minute line item that says, if there's something that needs to be discussed in a board meeting about the agenda, that there's a way to do that. I just have felt very challenge, like there's always a barrier to getting something on the agenda that I think would have been really helpful to have been done more timely. And that I do agree that there should be some sort of board, deliberation that yes, this deserves time on the agenda, or no, it doesn't. So I think that's definitely a democratic process, and it doesn't feel democratic yet.
Emily, I would support that. And I think just that change that's suggested would cover it.
Yeah, I think there's even something on our current board agendas that say, additions to the agenda per the president. And I would just like to see that additions to the agenda, by a vote of the board.
And at the end now, it's been, the agenda's been changed to give board members an opportunity to say something. That's a new agenda item or opportunity, I guess.
What do you think, Michelle?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I agree we need a process, and I think we do need to have some general board consensus that we're, going to talk about whatever that topic is. And I think having that conversation to help understand why we're talking about it or why we're requesting it is valuable. So I do think that's, if we can move it to the regular board meeting. It's pretty rare we miss a work session, but there's probably more opportunity for that than missing an actual board meeting.
Yeah.
Regular meeting.
It's, as simple as, or at the appropriate time on the agenda, or, I mean, how do we really easily add that to this red line document?
I would defer to Mark on that part, kind of where he thinks that makes sense.
Let me and Camille kind of take a look at it, and we can figure out maybe, that we can summarize a process for board, getting things on the agenda. Maybe we can just, we can kind of figure out the wording and get it to you.
One of the things is even think about, for example, the way the city council puts things on the agenda. If there's a majority of one, my understanding is that then it is put on the agenda. So that may be something that's a little more precise and specific to use as a template.
I think that's a great option of sort of mirroring something that's already local and a little bit sort of known as a precedence, just to kind of use something that's not making it start from scratch.
Okay. So Mark and Camille are going to work on that part, and we'll see what that looks like.
We'll take a look at what others are doing specifically, and see what makes sense for us.
Thank you. And then, sorry, I don't want to be picky, but in 15, it says hold quarterly board member working agreement check-ins with fellow board members. Do we want to commit to quarterly, or I thought we had kind of said periodic, and I just wanted to clarify because quarterly makes it to me something that you're either meeting or not meeting. And I didn't know if that was our intention.
Yeah, so from the last meeting, the committee's conversation at the last meeting, the conversation went back and forth a lot, and at some of these things it was kind of challenging to discern what your decision was. So I put it in there and thought you guys could look it over and then refine it if.
So that does kind of lead into some of where I would just like to have a little bit more conversation around communication, because I just feel like that's really been one of the biggest issues that we've kind of keep circling around is, and I just think a lot of our, our working dynamic and all kinds of different things, and not just ours, but any board is critically tied to your communication, and with each other, with the board chair, with the general manager, with, just in general, all of that really for me ties into how we build a functional team. So I think, quarterly board member working agreement check-ins. Maybe that feels extreme, but at the same time, I think it also ties us into making sure that we are making that effort to talk with each other and, you know, work through anything that might just kind of be causing us any type of concern, or just, I don't know, concern might not be, I mean, it could be around anything. I just think it helps us build a more functional team if we're making that effort and that committed effort to communicate.
Michelle, what does that look like exactly?
You know,
Meetings or?
Well, you know, I just think like it might be different for everybody. I just want to make sure that we're not avoiding conversations or you know, it's easy when you're upset or frustrated, or you know, to just kind of pull yourself away from something as opposed to leaning into it and working through it and talking through it. And I still feel like we're still missing that connectivity piece. And Susan, it's probably different for you than it is for me, but I just want to make sure that we're making that commitment to staying open to communication. And if there's, you know, if there's a concern or a frustration, that we're dealing with it and not letting it just sit idle. Because I think that's where things kind of explode after a while, right? When you don't talk through stuff.
I guess I guess what I'm asking is, so quarterly, what does that look like? There's a special meeting or communication?
Maybe, can I jump in? Maybe this will help. I'd like this to say something like offer at least quarterly offer, you know, by phone or Zoom or in-person meeting, you know, as needed, rather than saying it's a requirement. I think, Michelle, you kind of said it, everybody might be a little bit different. And so I just want to make sure that we're holding accountable to what is actually a priority for us. And where somebody might say a text message or an email or a phone call might be sufficient, somebody else might need an hour in person. And so just trying to give that, again, leniency in this document would be my preference. So maybe just something like a quarterly request or offer of a check-in at you know, whatever mode of communication is appropriate. With that way we don't lose it. And I think that kind of does set the tone of that expectation, but without having the, you know, you're doing this or you're not doing this, whereas maybe just the offer of it is really what the intention is. I don't know, does that help at all?
And we could put it on a quarterly work session agenda, for instance, just say, you know, any, you know, a board check-in, and it can be whatever, you know, the board wants it to be, right? And so we could just have that as a standing quarterly agenda item.
I like that.
That
Yeah.
feels comfortable for me. I don't know, does that capture it, Michelle, comfortably for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can, as long as we're as long as we're addressing things in a moment and not letting, you know, if it's something that just needs to be addressed in a moment, that we're committing ourselves to helping facilitate that. And
Right.
you know, I think
And
at a quarterly board check-in, I think that's great. It's like, you know, we've now gone through this quarter. Is there anything that we could look at doing differently, or how is communication feeling? Have we started to open that up? Is there, you know what I mean? I think we can have those conversations. I just want to make sure we're functioning really well as a team. And I kind of feel like sometimes there's still some disconnect, and I'd like to solve for that.
Yeah, I know. I think it's really important. And I'm just wanting to make sure that we're prioritizing the right issues. And for me, I think a lot of that would have been resolved had we gotten things on the agenda in a more timely manner. And so a lot of the extra communication behind the scenes wouldn't have been necessary. I think some of those frustrations went on for far too long.
I think also quarterly makes it, I mean, I think Mark, as you suggesting having a quarterly check-in, I think that's good. I agree with that. I think that's sort of a different issue that what Michelle is talking about. And instead of quarterly, would it make sense to have it be regular or as needed? Because if it's quarterly, then it's like, well, we just had one. Where regular means that it's in the moment and it's happening, it's more timely. To me, that's where it'd be more useful or practical rather than maybe 3 months later, it's
Miss the
seems-
timely part.
yeah. And the effectiveness is the immediacy of it.
Could we say maybe like have an open dialogue around working agreement check-ins with fellow board members?
Yes.
Because I think open dialogue for me says, hey, the door is always open to have this discussion. And that way it's, maybe once a week versus quarterly, or maybe it's semi-annual. It's sort of at the discretion of whatever it is that's going on. And I think, again, if we're going back to setting the tone, that really is what you're getting at, is open dialogue and not like what to me feels like more like a performance review.
Yeah.
So I'm going to interject something here because I think we can head off a lot of what you're talking about. And, the weekly luncheons where, just up to 3 board members get together with the general manager and talk through stuff and what's going on. And, it's not decision making, but it's like, what do you think of moving ahead? What are your issues? What are you, thinking about? And, also some kind of personality things come into play. So you get to know each other a little bit better and, it just improves the working environment. So, I'd encourage you to continue to have those, because we can really head off a lot of the stuff you're talking about, at those. So.
Yeah. And for those, for me, those have been really kind of nice to just get to know my fellow board members in a different way, not just through a Zoom screen or, through business dialogue, but just on a more personal level. Like, I've learned a lot about Pete that I didn't know, and I find that really valuable. We share the same birthday, which, hey, there you go, right? But those are things I think that just make working together kind of it just adds to a more, for me, a more effective dynamic. So with Mark, I would just encourage folks, and I know it's not something we can do all the time or every week or whatever, but to try to make that something that you can attend at least once in a while. I've found it to be very helpful and valuable.
Well, I mean, I'll just be frank. I think I'm the only one who hasn't had attended one of those Fridays, and part of it is that Friday's my day with my grandchildren, but also it feels I'm a bit there's been so much attention given to these Friday meetings, and to me, I think a lot of the issues of communication are not necessarily, I think it's the proper communication, respectful communication isn't just something that's going to happen on a Friday lunch. It's the communication and the dialogue that happens when there are meetings, when there is a work session, when there is other communication via email and so on. So, I mean, I understand, clearly that seems to be a priority of the people on this call. And I'm not saying it isn't important. It just, I guess in a way, I feel like it's taken on a greater importance than what I have met with other board members. It seems prescripted to me, to be honest with you. So that's just my response.
I don't know what that means, that he's prescriptive. So explain that to me. It's just, for me, it's an opportunity for me to meet with board members. It's an opportunity for board members to get to know each other, build the trust, build the communication, and, it just makes it easier at meetings, actually. So, yeah. And, it's not required, and, it's just an opportunity. So
Mhm.
I
I-
think we're
I guess
talking
when
about,
I say prescripted, it means, I mean, there's sort of a, when you say it's an opportunity, I understand that, but I feel like there's sort of a judgment attached to it when you don't do it. So that's, I feel like we spend a lot of time in meetings, and when I look at my calendar and all the commitments that there are with LTD activities. So anyway, that's, I said what I.
So Susan, let me ask you this then. And this is the reason this working agreement needs to be somewhat flexible, right? And not dictatorial.
Mhm.
But just for us today, what is your preferred kind of way to communicate with fellow board members, and just kind of, or with Mark, or what works best for you? I'm not saying.
I mean, there isn't a formula necessarily. It depends on the issue. It depends on the person. It depends on the timing. I mean, it's not like I can only do one thing or another. And certainly the pandemic has made this very more complicated than it normally would be. I like all of those communication, phone call, in person, Zoom, whatever. When you say what's my preferred, I don't have a preferred. It's whatever makes the most sense for the moment. My preferred is in person.
Mine too. I think you get a lot better.
Yeah.
I think you get just a much better experience in person. But
Mhm.
I guess for me, what I'm saying, basically the gist of my angst is that I want to make sure we're being responsive to each other. And that if someone reaches out, that we're responding to that.
so Michelle, if in a perfect world, would you keep 15 the way that it is, or how would you change it? And Susan, I'm going to ask you the same thing.
Well, I think we're talking about two different things, right? So to put that on the calendar quarterly and just say, hey, we've been really working on this. How is that feeling? Is there, like communication, for example? Are you feeling that we've opened up the communication? Is there something we still need to do? How is that feeling? I think that's a more full board member generic kind of conversation.
Yeah.
And we're talking two different things. Like, I'm kind of talking about if there is something between two board members that they need to talk about, or just understand, or maybe I don't want to get into specific examples about any of that. I'm just saying that if there's a reach out for a reason, and I want to make sure that we're responding to that, and that we're open to a conversation, and having whatever dialogue needs to be had to settle anything before it becomes a bigger issue or concern, or frustration, or I want to I don't want to see us in another situation like we were in before. And I feel like some of that was just because the communication lines weren't open.
I agree with that, Michelle. I agree.
So how are we representing that in this document, guys?
Well, I think that might be in the I think that's in just kind of how we as a board, so in the role of the board, not the leadership necessarily, but up in the, and I kind of touched on this last time, or I don't have my school district agreement in front of me, but there was some stuff specifically around communication, about assuming good intent, respectful communication, being receptive. and again, I don't have the document in front of me, but there are just some things that kind of just say, hey, let's just work together, right? And let's trust each other and work on building that trust, because that's a lot where communication kind of starts to solidify that.
So
I don't
Michelle,
know.
do you think we captured that in the section above? So under role of the board, I feel like we sort of touched on it in 10, 11, and 12.
Well, so 10 speaks to professionalism and ethical conduct. It doesn't speak specifically to open lines of communication.
Okay, how about in 11 and 12? Because I feel like we talked about this pretty in depth the last time, and I think this is how we were trying to capture that in the document.
So those speak to relationship with the between board members and general manager. I just want to make sure we're including each other in that. I don't want to see it specifically tied to my relationship with Mark or your relationship with Mark. I want to see that as our relationship with each other too, and make sure we're focused on caring for that relationship too.
So in number 11 and 12, could Camille say with the GM and fellow board members on both 11 and 12 to more appropriately capture your concerns?
I mean, maybe, I think it's really as simple as just saying we'll maintain open dialogue with fellow board members and, something.
Yeah, so 15, you would say, rather than hold quarterly, say maintain open dialogue with fellow board members.
Well, again, those are I think we're talking about two different things there. I think that 15 is more of a full board check-in, right? A full board quarterly check-in related to a specific thing, like maybe it's communication, maybe it's something different.
Okay, so would you say 15 whole, have open dialogue between the full board, and then maybe a 16 that says have open dialogue between board members? I'm trying to figure out what this,
Yeah.
I mean, because we've talked about this a lot and I want to get it right, but I also want to make sure that we have time to cover other topics.
Sure. 15 is under the role of board leadership. I think we can just move up into the role of the board and just add a bullet point. And I don't have specific wording in my head right now, but just something that just says we will maintain open dialogue. We will assume good intent, and we'll.
Do you mind if you said, like, if there was a 13 under that section, maybe just shoot us all an email and say, here's what maybe I proposed for 13, because I think we're really close and I like where your head's at with this. I think that you probably feel more strongly about this than Susan and I do. I kind of feel like I'm right in between you guys. So I'm like, well, I like this, but I also want flexibility and for people to take accountability for their own concerns, right? So if I have a concern, I'm going to reach out, but I'm not going to make Michelle, you reach out to me if you have a concern, right? That's just sort of the onus is on you on that. So I want to make sure we're creating that space for people to react and sort of work the way that is best for them. So maybe that's the solution, is we do like a 13 red line and say, here's Michelle's, language for that. And then Susan and I can weigh in, let Camille wordsmith that for us.
Yeah, I can do that. And that's the thing too, right? We're trying to just set a tone and kind of open communication is really what I'm looking for. So I can definitely come up with something that.
Okay, so you're going to write a 13, and then I think in the next section under role of board leadership 15, we just want to maybe play with that a little bit. Camille, I think you hopefully have enough information to kind of modify that a little bit, removing the hold quarterly, and maybe putting something more like in a quarterly work session. We'll see if anybody has anything. Maybe we just even have like an open discussion, every so often on a working session.
So just to clarify, I've gotten a little bit lost in the conversation. So 13 is adding agenda items, which I have noted down as just adding that to the regular board meeting agendas and taking it off of the work session. So I was going to just adjust the wording in 13 to say at regular board meetings instead of work sessions.
I
And
think it was
then-
in addition to, sorry to interrupt.
Oh, okay. So it'll be on both work session and regular meeting agendas. Okay. Perfect. And regular meetings. Okay. And then for 15, I thought that I heard that we were going to add that as a quarterly agenda item on work session agendas. Did I misunderstand that?
I think that's what Mark suggested, that we add a quarterly item to the work session agenda.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and
I have the same concern. If we don't have a work session for that quarter, then somebody's responsible for moving that to the next month, assuming we have a work session that month. So I guess maybe that should be, or board meeting if necessary, just to keep that not messy for you, Camille. I don't know if that helps or doesn't help.
we could say just a quarterly board meeting, and then whether it falls on a work session or a regular meeting, we would determine that on the staff side for what fits.
Yeah, try to keep it simple for you guys.
Okay, and then did I also understand correctly that Michelle is going to provide suggested language for 15, and then I can add that into the next version we bring back at the next meeting?
I will write for 13 up above where we are. So under the role of the board, not the board leadership, I'll write something around communication.
Okay. Okay, well, so just to be clear, at the last meeting, we eliminated role of board leadership altogether. So that has actually been stricken. So on your red line version, it's stricken out. And
Okay.
because we had moved all of those items to the bylaws.
Right.
But so we're going to now move those back. So my thought was I would change that from role of board leadership to role of board president.
Okay, yeah, I can see now it's lined out.
Okay.
Sorry. The lines
Okay.
are starting to get a little fuzzy on me.
I know, it has been a lot. And so what you're currently looking at for number 13 and number 15, once I make that change, those are going to move up under role of the board.
Right, okay.
Okay,
So
Sorry,
I'll
just
craft language and you can just plug it in wherever it makes sense.
and
Okay.
Probably
point of
easier.
clarification, sorry, I just want to clarify that the role of board leadership would stay as is, and then we would just add role of the president / chair and add those bullet points back over.
okay, okay,
Because I think the board leadership, I think, should be its own separate piece, because there's got the executive leadership.
okay.
You know, something when looking at this whole document and responsibilities of communication, do we want to insert or include anything in there in terms of the role and responsibility of the board with regard to communication and outreach to public?
What section are you in, Susan? I just want to make sure I'm with you.
I'm just saying, I mean, it isn't in there. So I'm just, as we're talking about communication and how important that is between board and staff, between board and so on, it occurs to me that a big part of the responsibility is our liaison with public. Should there be something that really specifies that in our bylaws or working documents or something, at least to not be silent on that?
Is that covered in our board public engagement policy?
Yes,
There's a specific policy around public engagement. I don't know if you read through that, if that's getting to where your thoughts are going. So just to kind of maybe work to wrap this one up, to me, this document is where we kind of hold each other accountable. You know, right, we have this agreement that we have in place that kind of tells us how we want to work together and function as a board and with our general manager. So I want to just, you know, this is where we can refer back to and say, hey, you know, I don't feel like we're adhering to this, the tone of this specific item. But I want to make sure that, you know, we just are,
I mean, I think we've talked about it a lot. I think.
yeah, right. I just think that we need to make sure that we're holding ourselves accountable for saying, hey, I feel like we need to deal with this, right? And I think that needs to be between the general manager and the board. I think we just have to build that comfort with saying, hey, wait a second, you know, we need to, you know, we need to adhere to what we've agreed to do. So I don't want to get this too tight so that we feel so restricted. I just want to make sure that we're really embracing it, I guess, is what I kind of want to say there. Okay, so now Camille's going to bring us back another draft version of that document. Are we ready to move? Ready to move forward? And that would put us at the harassment policy. And I have some thoughts on that one. Not too many. I think it's pretty tight policy. I just think that maybe it needs a couple of adjustments after we've kind of had an experience and an opportunity to learn some things. So Emily and Susan, kind of what are your thoughts there?
Sorry, so 1 second to find it in my.
Yeah, me too. You have thoughts, why don't you go ahead while we're looking?
I'm kind of trying to find mine too.
Oh.
So I do think that we need to probably talk about what we would like to see our report come back with, right? What does that report look like? What should where do we want to see it focused? Because I think the last one we saw was a little bit, I think I expected more from it than what we received.
Camille, can you put that up? I'm having a hard time coming across it and I don't want to keep digging.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm having a hard time finding mine too. What's that?
Why? Go. Every time.
That's the 63-page document. And what page are you on?
11.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So generally speaking, without tying it to a particular paragraph, I think what my thoughts were on this policy is that we didn't really have a clear understanding on if there were a complaint, what the process is to handle that once we receive a report back, like what is the expectation, what can the request be as far as like, do we want just a 2-line sentence for, the purpose of a press release? Do we want it to be a full report? Like what is the expectation for the investigating attorney to provide? And then I also wanted to take out any language that felt subjective because I think there's where I want to be really considerate of folks who might be using this policy because there's an issue. I also want to be sure that we're being mindful of the scope of opportunity, if you will, to maybe keep this really succinct, that there's patterns of behavior that aren't just like hurting people's feelings, but are actually like a legal issue. Does that make sense? I don't want to sound insensitive to folks who might be having, issues with something that they would be making a complaint against, but I just want it to be really clear that it's a, document, it's a legal process, right? And so I just want to make sure we're
we're using this document in that way. Does that feel comfortable for everybody, or is that too extreme one way or the other?
Do you have kind of some specific like direction to take that in?
I guess going back to the process or the procedure that we just went through, I think to have more clarity around what was the process that led to needing a report or the investigation, just so that there's some context. Just to have a more robust process, I think is important. Yeah, Michelle, as you said, the report that came at the end was pretty unsatisfactory in terms of, and I think we all sort of, well, I'm not going to say all, I think that there was agreement that what the investigation was intended, or the intent, or the stated intent, and what came out of the report was there was a big gap in between that, and to have been able to know how did it go from here to here. So I think more history and context. I don't know how you put that in there, but.
Well, and maybe something else to consider is that our policy really is it is kind of a leap, right? So you go from having the issue and having it really go right to an investigation. There's really no kind of interim that I'm aware of. And so I feel like in some cases, maybe Michelle, what you've been talking about, that rapport building, would alleviate some of those concerns or issues, because people say, oh, that comment was meant, in this way and not in that way. And I think that intention has sort of been lost in some cases, although clearly I don't know all of the circumstances. But I feel like we either have too big of a gap between how we deal with these sorts of issues, like maybe it needs to go to an HR committee before it goes to investigation, right? I feel like I just want to be mindful that whoever has made a complaint probably didn't feel like that report was satisfactory either. And the people who were named in that complaint didn't feel like it was satisfactory. And the board itself didn't feel like it was satisfactory. And probably the public didn't feel like it was very satisfactory. And I just think that clearly that's a policy issue. And how do we build that in that says, here is a better process or a more clear outcome of, we investigated this and there was no result, or we investigated it and here are the results. And these are the 3 formats that we request from the attorney that says, here's what we're able to provide to the public, to the board, et cetera. And maybe there is some sort of a safety guard in place that says, we don't get to know all of the details, but certainly knowing more details would have been allowed us to be more effective in responding to that complaint and then implementing a policy that's helpful for both the staff and the board. Sorry.
I think one of our responsibilities is to make sure that employees are protected. So what is that process in terms of there is a complaint, it goes to the supervisor, it goes to the HR director, what is that process, so that as a board, we can be competent or confident that employees are protected, that there is a process for them that's safe, that is, that will be looked at objectively, and that if there is something that is inappropriate, that there will be appropriate action taken. I don't have that confidence based on the process we just went through. So I guess that's what I'm referring to when there is robust, a fuller dialogue. So
that's a great question. Yeah.
I think you're mixing 2 things. So the failure of the report and the failure of the people who actually did that investigation and present a report is different than the initial part where employee makes a complaint and, we do an, investigation. So, so there's kind of two just separate things. I mean, if an employee complains to me about a behavior of a board member, the board is my boss. I'm not going to investigate my board. And so what I would do is turn it over to our attorney, or I have a discussion with our attorney, say, look, we need to do this. It needs to be an independent, which I think it says there. And, and it needs to be thorough. So, and I think that part worked fine until, the investigation and the report, which was the failure in this instance. So anyway, that's just my input.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mark. So thanks for saying that, because it does put you in an awkward position to say, I'm not going to investigate my boss. Is there any way that you can see, or maybe other organizations have had some sort of interim, so that it doesn't just go right to investigation without maybe just vetting it a little bit? I'm just trying to get some clarity on saving the district some dollars with attorney's fees, and just sort of getting a little bit more, maybe a little bit protective of the board in that case.
We could, I mean, we've got, we're a member of Cascade Employers, and they do a lot of this kind of work. And so certainly we could say, I mean, an independent third party can be anybody, right? It doesn't necessarily have to go to attorney. And so Cascade Employers does a lot of this kind of work. And certainly we could, I hate to name them specifically in our bylaws or our policy, but
Maybe like a mediation.
Yeah.
Outsource. Mark, I mean, I appreciate the incredibly difficult position that whoever is the general manager is in, given a complaint that would happen towards a board member. Is the HR, human resources, are they involved in this? I mean, that is the expertise of an HR director. Not saying you don't have expertise, but that isn't your primary responsibility. So, I mean, part of what I think would be helpful to know is within the organization, how does it move up? I'm not saying that this, boards should absolutely be held accountable, and probably more accountable just because of the responsibility. But at the same time, how does it get to that?
Yeah. So again, it's awkward to say, okay, board, HR director, who works for the general manager. Here, you start this investigation on my board, it's still awkward. I mean,
no, I'm not suggesting that they would be the investigation. No, I'm suggesting that, what is the consultation between the two to evaluate how serious the accusations are. And I mean, whatever is relevant in this process towards a board member, I'm assuming it would be as important, or certainly important within the staff, just employees, if it was a concern not with a board member. So I guess I was just, and to make sure that there's a accountability process that is more defined, I guess.
So I think kind of what I'm hearing, and I have kind of a similar thought. What I think I'm hearing is there something that we can do sooner to kind of maybe not get us in this position where we're doing a full-on investigation? Like, is there some mediation that could happen before that? So that takes because you have to have a neutral party. I don't think there's any other way to do that, but maybe instead of, so if there's a complaint filed, is there a way at that point to bring in a mediator or some sort of a consultant to help maybe solve that before it becomes this bigger issue, because I absolutely want to, we want to make sure we're protecting LTD employees. We want to make sure that we're, we just want to make sure that everyone impacted by this is being given some sort of a fair opportunity, I think, to resolve it in a better
So,
way.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
levels, sort of different levels of response.
I think it would be appropriate to, determine if that's something that can be resolved with mediation, right? Like if there's a sexual harassment issue or something that's really, sort of above and beyond,
Right.
I think that would be something I would not anticipate, a victim of that sort of behavior to want to mediate. So maybe
Right,
there's
right.
sort of severity, like you're kind of mentioning, Susan, like a progression of what might be the response. Or I'm sorry, maybe Michelle, you said that first. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think we're all kind of saying the same thing. So there are so many different forms of harassment or bullying, or all of them are inappropriate, and we need to deal with them. That is not, I don't think, disputable. It's just for me, that process felt really like from 0 to 60 in about 5 seconds. And I just wonder if there might have been an opportunity, and maybe there wasn't in that case, but it just, and maybe there were other things that happened before that we weren't aware of that maybe accelerated it that quickly. I don't know. I just feel like it was just kind of all of a sudden we were dealing with that, right? And I just, if there's any way to kind of put something in front of that helps us coach or
facilitate better communication, as you kind of mentioned before. The only other thing that I'd like to see in this policy is just maybe a little bit more education around, well, let me back up. I feel like when we put this policy together, we had a ton of legal counsel support. We had, a third party that came in and helped us walk through this. And then it sort of felt like, now here's the report. What do you want to do with it? And I don't know if that's because of the change in legal counsel, but I did not feel well supported once we received the report. Like, was there a reason why we couldn't go back and ask for a better, findings or better, analysis? I just felt like it was tons of support around writing this policy and then zero support around sort of what to do with it. And I'm still a little bit disappointed in how that went, just because I think we could have done better, but I honestly don't know what better looks like without maybe improving this policy. In the event that it ever did happen again, we could say, oh, and now we've got the report findings, we'd like more information on A, B, or C, or we'd like, something further than what I think we received in that executive session. So there's like about 4 different areas to start, making a little bit more of a robust policy. Or
the other thing that I think we need to add in here is just some conversation around attorneys. If I were in this situation and I felt the need to bring an attorney on to help guide me through that, who's responsible for that, right? Who's responsible for paying those fees? Just kind of I think we need to add some conversation around that too.
That's a really good point, Michelle, because I know we've had some question marks that have come up after the fact about that. So I think knowing upfront what that looks like would be really important, especially, had the report findings been different. I think that could have been a much more significant discussion point.
And Mark, maybe at this point, this is kind of just knowing kind of what we're trying to accomplish. Is this something that maybe we can go to a professional to kind of help us craft some wording or tweak the process?
Yeah, because there is a lot of legal obligations here, when it comes to how we handle complaints from employees. And then, then I think we can find the outcome that you guys are looking for, in terms of if a complaint is filed, then these are the steps that should be taken. And so I think Camille, I can think through that and maybe work with Andrea to come up with something that meets our legal obligation, but also gives the board kind of some room, I guess, to be able to respond and to get the information that they need. But yeah, I mean, it's really dicey territory. So, we do.
Yeah, I don't want to
help.
try and craft anything here. I just think kind of talking through what we like to accomplish and then having that guidance from professionals is pretty valuable here.
And I want to
Maybe
make
this
sure.
is where, excuse me, maybe this is Mark, somewhere the Cascade would have some expertise or experience too.
Yeah, they absolutely do. So.
Great idea, Susan. And I was going to say, I think for me, the first thing I'd want is that this protects employees and make sure that we're not having any kind of acceptance around bullying, harassment, or discrimination, but then also doing it in a way that it's really clear to all parties what the expectation is and what the outcome will look like.
Right, and what that process is going to look like if there is an allegation or a complaint against you specifically. It just, I do think that we learned a few things from this one, and I think we can kind of, just kind of make it a little bit better.
Great.
Better for everyone. I really feel like the folks who had complaints probably didn't feel very fairly heard, or at least maybe not fairly expressed in the report. So I want to be really considerate of those folks on both sides, and the people named maybe just didn't get what they needed out of it either. So we didn't learn and get to use that information for a better process. I think this is our chance to do that.
Great.
Okay.
Mark, is this going to be something that you take back to Cascade, or how do we want to sort of wrap this piece up if we're ready to do that?
I'm hoping Camille took good notes, and we'll kind of sit down and summarize those, and then decide, who do we need to go to, who can give us the best advice in putting it together.
For the opportunity to talk about this. It's been a topic that's really important to me for several reasons, and I feel like this is going to be a good place to make it better for everybody involved.
And so just a little process here in terms of the bylaws. So we want those to be reviewed and bring those back to the board next month. And then but the policy is probably going to take a little longer. So, the policy we're going to have to do a little work on. So that'll probably take probably a month or so anyway, because there's a little more details in that.
Maybe we can include the board working agreement policy in that and just get those two pieces completed and then follow up with this. Because I agree, this one is really one we want to focus on and get it right.
Yeah.
And make sure that we're being held accountable to the highest standards of treating our, employees with respect and, just making sure that that is an expectation of us and that we're taking that very seriously. But at the same time, just kind of making some adjustments as we did definitely, I think, learn some things.
Okay. Yeah, we can do that. We can bring that one policy in the bylaws back and then work on this one and bring it back later.
Okay. And I don't feel like any of the other policies really need us to go through them. I think they're kind of more um, you know, they're around ethics and some things that are pretty clear out in the statutes. So does anyone else feel like we need to dive into others?
It's just, again, like that mirroring of all the documents. So as we're making adjustments to bylaw and board working agreement, it does make some policy changes in the roles. I think it's page 7, I think is where I noticed where it starts going back into like role of board leadership and role of each of the executive positions. So I think for me, it's just making sure everything is matching and providing clarity and not points of confusion.
Okay.
That's like a good question too, is that Mark or Camille, maybe just getting that cohesion, is that something that we have to like finish bylaws and finish board working agreement and then finish kind of going through policies? Because I do feel like there's going to be some things that aren't consistent.
Well, certainly we can take a look and look for inconsistencies. I mean, you know, so my guess is there shouldn't be, you know, the working agreement shouldn't, you know, impact other things, but we can certainly take a look at that. And if there are things that jump out, bring it back to you guys.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. So we scheduled a meeting for March 21st in case we needed it to finish any, you know, fine tune or finish anything up. Do we feel like we still need to do that?
I think it depends on when Camille's able to do her massive project.
Well, I mean, the only thing really left for us to do is put together, you know, what we did today and get it ready for the board meeting, including taking the bylaws to the for attorney review, and then beyond that, it's working on the kind of complaint process and reviewing that and trying to, you know, come up with a workable solution to that. And that's one that'll take a little time. So, so I think we have what we need for now. So it's really up to you if you want to work March 21st or not.
So my understanding.
Go ahead, sorry.
My understanding was that the additional revisions that are being made to bylaws and the working agreement, that I'm going to make those adjustments and bring that last version back to the March 21st meeting. And then those will go to the board in April. And then this committee will need one additional meeting to go through the proposed revisions to this harassment policy, which will take at least a month or so to get back from council. So it sounds like you may need one more meeting, maybe later in April or the beginning of May for that piece. And it sounds like then everything is complete as far as the responsibilities of this committee.
Okay, so we don't need March 21st meeting because we need to get some pieces taken care of in between now and our next meeting. So,
well,
so we would come back in April or May.
I can have the requested revisions to the bylaws and the working agreement ready in time for the March 21st meeting. So you can use that time to review that final draft of those two items so that they can be ready to go to the board in April.
Okay. So we have 2 hours scheduled. We probably wouldn't need 2 hours to do that. Does everyone agree? Maybe an hour would be sufficient?
I mean, or if, you know, we send them, you know, we can send them to you for review. They're going to go to the board anyway. I mean, so, I mean, we could just send it out to you in advance. You can take a look and we just plan on having the discussion at the board rather than you having a 21st thing going again. So, I mean, it's really up to you if you want to meet.
Can we compromise that and say, let's, whenever we do get the documents from Camille, let's review them and just make sure there's nothing that we feel like, you know, just sort of got missed or is duplicative. And then if it looks good, cancel the 21st meeting and just have it go to the board, as Mark mentioned. So that sounds like a good happy medium.
Agree.
Sounds good.
Okay. Wow, you guys, this is very exciting. Good work, everybody, especially Camille. I think she's worked the hardest on this.
I know we're just
Thank
running her in circles.
So I think that's a good plan. I just want to also provide a reminder about serial communication. So when I send you the final versions, you can only email me directly, and Mark, of course, if you have any feedback, not each other, because there's the three of you, two of you is a quorum. And so what you could do is just email me directly and say, we need to meet or we don't need to meet on the 21st. And that'll be sufficient.
Okay. And if we're just talking about meeting, that wouldn't be serial communication. But if we're talking about meeting about specific topics, that would be a different story, because that could be something that could potentially be voted on.
If you have revisions, then that cannot be a reply all.
So if we just respond with, we do have some additional thoughts, we'd like to have a conversation about those, and maybe then we just need to make that March 21st meeting
Correct.
still happen.
Right. And you
Right.
can email the whole committee on that to say,
Right.
look,
Yeah.
I got some issues I wanna,
Right,
need
not
to
getting
meet
into
21st.
specifics,
Correct.
but just saying I have some, yeah.
We need a meeting. Yep.
Okay,
Lastly, we had scheduled the March 21st meeting to be another in-person meeting. Would you like that to remain the case, or would you like to make it just a virtual and just 1 hour? What are your thoughts there?
I guess since it's supposed to be flexible, can we just do Zoom since we,
Yes, absolutely. That
How
would
did-
probably be simpler.
yeah. Michelle and Emily, you feel the same? Like we could do in person, but if it's just going to be a quick.
We've covered it really well. I thought in person was going to be really necessary, but I think we're actually further ahead than I anticipated. And so I think Zoom would be just fine, especially if it's we may not even need the meeting at all.
I agree.
Great, thank you for that clarification.
Okay,
Sorry, because she said clarification. Would we go 11 to 12 or 12 to 1 if we do keep the 1 hour?
Thank you, Emily.
I just
I
looked
have
at my
both.
calendar. I was like, how will I change that?
I have it all blocked out, so I'm fine either way.
Okay, Camille gets to pick.
Then just make it from 11 to 12 and virtual.
Okay.
Great.
Perfect. All right, anything else before we adjourn?
thanks, everybody.
All right,
Michelle,
We-
thank you for doing that.
you're welcome. Happy to help.
Hope you get
Okay.
feeling better, Susan.
Thank you.
Migraines are awful.
Mm.
Okay, we are officially adjourned.